Hey Lifers, Dustin here, and in this video I want to take a look at the 10 games that I feel like impacted the 2017 season the most. Now, up front, I want to be honest with you, this is not the 10 best games of 2017, this is not my 10 favorite games or the 10 most memorable games. These are the 10 games that I think most impacted the outcome of the season as far as championships, as far as dashing playoff hopes, as far as upsetting fan bases. And obviously there are literally dozens, maybe even hundreds of different games that you could probably pick and put on this list depending on your criteria and what you were kind of looking for. But these are the 10 that I chose. And considering the fact that all these kind of build on each other in a certain sense, and the fact that if you lost a game in week 3, but then you lost it again in week 9, the loss in week 9 means more, right? So instead of counting down 10 to 1 as 10 being the 10th best thing and 1 being the first best thing, I decided to do it chronologically. So 10 is going to start at the beginning of the season, and 1 is going to go all the way to the regular season, or the end of the regular season, rather. No bowl games are on this list because I kind of think of those as the outcome of the regular season, right? So obviously the national championship game impacted the season a lot. We found out who it was. The playoffs counted a lot. Even conference championship games obviously counted a lot, but I did not include them on this list. I just focused on the regular season. So with that, let's get started with the 10th entry on this list, which is number 1, Alabama 24, number 3, Florida State 7. Billed all offseason as arguably the greatest opening game in college football history, Alabama made sure to capitalize on one of the worst special teams performances I've ever seen on a big stage, especially by a team like Florida State, which is not really known for having blunders on the special teams side of the ball. Alabama had a fumble recovery on a muffed punt return. They blocked a field goal attempt, and their starting running back, Damian Harris, blocked a punt that resulted in points for the Tide. But the major storylines coming out of this game revolved around injuries. Of course, most notably, Florida State starting quarterback DeAndre Francois, who is one of the reasons that Florida State was picked as preseason ACC champion, was lost to the season in the fourth quarter with a torn patella tendon. He is probably the biggest reason why Florida State ended up being 6-6 in the regular season and having to reschedule a game against UL Monroe in order to be bowl eligible. It may have also been one of the contributing factors with the season going the way that it did that Jimbo Fisher decided to take his talents to College Station and be Texas A&M's new head coach. On the Alabama side, they walked away from this game with 4 linebackers nursing injuries after this game, 2 of which would not return all the way until the Auburn game, and all of those injuries made some Alabama games later in the season a little bit closer than a lot of the experts expected it to be. Nailed it. It may have been a contributing factor in the loss to Auburn, which did keep Alabama from the SEC championship game. Number 9, Oklahoma 31, Ohio State 16. In 2016, Ohio State humiliated Oklahoma in their home stadium in a game where the final score did not indicate how not close the game was for most of the 4 quarters that were played. The win, in turn, helped Ohio State get into the college football playoff while being the determining factor in Oklahoma not making it into the playoff at the end of the season. In 2017, the roles were completely reversed. It was Oklahoma who humiliated Ohio State in their home stadium, coming with a giant exclamation point with Baker Mayfield stamping the flag down in the middle of the O in the middle of Ohio Stadium, but, it is what it is. Once again, the score did not properly indicate how not close this game was, and it was the determining factor that kept eventual number 5 Ohio State out of the college football playoff. Yes, a loss to Iowa down the road helped, but this is the one, just a loss to Iowa, maybe they could have got in. With this loss, in turn, they could not, while it was Oklahoma who went on to be in the 2017 college football playoff. Number 8, Georgia 20, Notre Dame 19. A lot of us wondered what exactly Kirby Smart could do at Georgia in year 2, and this was our first kind of reveal of what this team could and did end up being. Making his first start ever in a college football game, true freshman quarterback Jake Fromm performed in front of thousands and thousands of red-clad fans who made the trip to Georgia's furthest north game played since 1965 when they traveled to Michigan. A nice running attack paired with a very stout defense that was searching for its first SEC championship since 2005, this game, in a very tight game in a hostile environment, proved to us that maybe, just maybe, Georgia was for real. Number 7, LSU 27, Auburn 23. The annual clash of the SEC West Tigers came at a very good time for Auburn. Their only loss up until this point was a 8-point road loss to the defending national champion Clemson Tigers, and their offense started to gel with quarterback Jared Stidham, and we saw the emergence of running back Kerryon Johnson, while Florida was still kind of licking their wounds. They were a week removed away from a 1-point win in Gainesville against a very anemic Florida offense that they only won because of a missed extra point, and this was their first trip back home in Death Valley since a 24-21 defeat at the hands of Troy. After a 17-0 first quarter and a 20-0 lead in the second quarter, things did not look to be going very well for LSU and their head coach, Coach O. But 2 LSU second quarter touchdowns chipped the lead into a 23-14 score at halftime. Auburn would not score again. A couple of LSU field goals paired with a very stout LSU defense and a special teams touchdown on a punt return by DJ Chark led to one of, at the time, kind of the weirder upsets of the college football season. Since Auburn's only previous loss was to Clemson, there's a decent chance that if they had beaten LSU at the end of the season, their resume would have been good enough to put them at number 4 ahead of Alabama in the final playoff poll. Who knows? Number 6, Arizona 13, Washington 7. Surely Washington knew the history coming into this game. The Huskies had lost 6 straight against Arizona State and had not won in Tempe since 2001. On a weekend where 4 top 10 teams went down, Washington did not score in the game until 5.5 minutes left to go in the fourth quarter. They only mustered 230 yards on offense and went 4 of 13 on third down. A key 4th and 3 conversion by the Sun Devils ensured that Washington would never get the ball back the rest of the game and seemed to indicate that maybe Washington should not be expecting a second straight trip to the college football playoff. It also seemed to erode confidence nationally in the Pac-12, especially the teams at the top of the conference like Washington and USC. Number 5, Ohio State 39, Penn State 38. They had to have heard it all year long. Ohio State's loss to Penn State was a fluke. All of Penn State's fans and players had to be sick about hearing about that game and wanted to prove themselves in a game in Columbus against Ohio State. They also probably remembered that little thing about Ohio State not winning the conference that Penn State did, yet Ohio State went to the college football playoff and laid an egg, while Penn State played an instant classic against USC in the Rose Bowl. This was the time to finally prove it to the world that was not a fluke, that they could do it in Columbus. Especially after coming off a beatdown of Michigan, Penn State felt very confident going into this game, and a Saquon Barkley kickoff return touchdown to open the game, and Penn State jumping out to a quick 14-0 lead, things looked pretty bad for Ohio State. Penn State watched a 35-20 fourth quarter lead dwindle and be chipped away by 3 J.T. Barrett fourth quarter touchdowns until they had a 1-point deficit as the clock ran out in Ohio Stadium. This was behind not only J.T. Barrett's offensive performance, but also a defense that held Heisman hopeful running back Saquon Barkley, if you don't count the kick return, to only 44 yards on 21 carries. One of those carries was for 36 yards for a touchdown. The loss by Penn State to Ohio State likely had a bit of a hangover effect next week as they had a weather delay loss against Michigan State that knocked them out of the playoffs. Number 4, Oklahoma 62, Oklahoma State 52. Bedlam, usually the season finale for both teams, was moved up almost a month until November 4th in order to avoid these two potentially playing in 2 weeks back-to-back, both in Bedlam and in the Big 12 championship game. But after early season upsets of both teams, a loss here proved to be pretty damaging for either one. Both teams had arguably the two best offenses in the country, and both were led by Heisman hopeful quarterbacks in Oklahoma's Baker Mayfield and Oklahoma State's Mason Rudolph, and in a competition between the two, they both finished with 5 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. But in a game where both offenses had over 650 total yards, Baker Mayfield threw for 598 and got the win, and likely cemented himself as the Heisman Trophy frontrunner, if not basically clinching the trophy for himself. As for Oklahoma State, the once hopeful Cowboys felt a little bit less hopeful after having 2 losses, both in conference, and both of those losses ended up keeping the Cowboys out of the Big 12 championship game. Number 3, Iowa 55, Ohio State 24. After defeating number 2 Penn State, Ohio State was once again in the thick of the college football playoff chase, and they still had plenty of big opportunities and plenty of big obstacles to come. But, unbeknownst to many in the college football world, it would actually be a trip to Iowa City the following week, which would essentially doom Ohio State's playoff chances. The comeback king of Columbus, quarterback JT Barrett, started off the game against Iowa throwing a touchdown pass to the wrong team. Iowa defensive back Amari Hooker took the pass in for a touchdown, and it would set the tone for a game in which Barrett had 4 interceptions that led to 17 Iowa points. By the time the 4th interception happened, Iowa held a pretty healthy 48-17 lead over the Buckeyes and would go on to win 55-24. This 31-point loss in Iowa City was the determining factor by the College Football Playoff Committee to keep Alabama at number 4 and Ohio State at number 5 in their final polls. Alabama, of course, used that number 4 seeding to go on and win the national championship. Number 2, Auburn 40, Georgia 17. All during the season, I kept seeing comments from you in my comment section with things like, Dustin, doesn't this remind you of the 2007 season? Or, Dustin, this year is so crazy and wild, it feels like anything can happen just like 2007, doesn't it? And no, I don't think there will ever be a season that will duplicate the madness that was 2007, but there was a couple of teams that really felt like during their games, anything can happen, and I don't think a single team represented that idea more than the 2017 Auburn Tigers. Coming into this first meeting against Georgia in 2017, Auburn had lost to 2 teams, that being Clemson and LSU. Those teams went on to lose to Syracuse and Troy, which is not a good look for Auburn, but yet here they were in mid-November ranked in the top 10 in the country. In a rivalry with Georgia, where it feels like almost anything can and will happen, Auburn outclassed the eventual SEC champions, running out to a 40-17 lead at home when Georgia and their freshman quarterback Jake Fromm just looked completely out of sorts in the wild environment. Auburn looked like they were this unstoppable force in college football. They still had Alabama and then a rematch against Georgia in the SEC championship. They looked to be completely on course to be the first ever 2-loss team to make the playoff. More importantly for the SEC, a Georgia victory here would have ensured that Auburn was eliminated from the SEC West contention, that Alabama would have officially claimed the SEC West title, and would have met Georgia in Atlanta not for the national championship, but in the SEC championship game. This would have pretty much ensured that only one SEC team would have gotten into the college football playoff, meaning that likely Ohio State would have been number 4 in the nation, playing number 1 Clemson in the Sugar Bowl. Now, before I tell you my number 1 game, it's happened chronologically, they're not really number 1, or maybe they are, I do have some honorable mentions. Clemson 14, Auburn 6. In this game, Kelly Bryant officially established himself as the best quarterback at Clemson, and that Clemson could trust him to run the offense and continue towards another playoff berth. TCU 44, Oklahoma State 31. This game established TCU as a force to be reckoned with in the Big 12 and likely eventually kept out Oklahoma State out of the Big 12 championship. Washington State 30, USC 27, a Friday night game that pretty much was the death knell of the Pac-12 being in the college football playoff. Clemson 38, NC State 31. Laptop or not, this was Clemson's biggest pitfall or potential pitfall on the way to a third straight ACC championship and a third straight college ball playoff. If NC State had won this game, which at times it looked like they were very capable to do so, it would have been the Wolfpack representing the ACC Atlantic in the 2017 ACC championship against Miami. UCF 31, SMU 24. Yes, this game is on here, believe it or not, as an honorable mention. UCF had chances to blow the game. SMU had chances to win the game. But at the end of the day, UCF did stay perfect as they would the entire year. Oklahoma 38, TCU 20. This established Oklahoma as officially the best team in the Big 12. Kind of made the Big 12 championship a moot point at this point, and it cemented Baker Mayfield's Heisman Trophy if the Oklahoma State game didn't already do that. And the last game on this list, and my number one pick for the number one game that most impacted the 2017 season, because it happened the last weekend of the season, is Auburn 26, Alabama 14. Usually in any given college football season, there is one team that you can pretty much follow to kind of get the gist of the entire season, and as I've already alluded to, in 2017, that team very much was the Auburn Tigers. In a game with not only state bragging rights, but also the SEC West title on the line, the winner of this game would go on to face Georgia in the SEC Championship, a Georgia team that Auburn had just obliterated 40-17. This game also showed how, at times, Jalen Hurts can be very limited in the passing game against a quality defense. The undefeated Crimson Tide's defensive injuries finally revealed themselves to be too much to overcome against a very quality, top-notch team in Auburn, and the Tigers won. But Auburn seemed to have won the battle, but Alabama won the war. In the game, in the Iron Bowl, Kerryon Johnson, who was having a Heisman-type season, was injured, and that injury carried over into the SEC Championship and played probably the biggest role in Georgia defeating Auburn 28-7 and moving on to the college football playoff. It also impacted Alabama's season because the Tide finished number 4 in the final playoff poll without having to play the conference championship game. They got an extra week to rest players, which they badly needed, and they used the number 4, they didn't even win their own division, they shouldn't even be here argument as motivation against Clemson in the Sugar Bowl. Jalen's inability to throw the ball in this game was likely in the back of their mind of the coaching staff as they went into the college football playoff. Saban openly talked about the idea of playing Tua in the Clemson game. It never happened because Alabama dominated, but they did insert him into halftime, or into the third quarter after halftime, of the national championship game against Georgia, with Jalen as their quarterback, and without the Auburn game, maybe as better evidence of what it was like with Jalen against a top-tier defense in Auburn. Tua may not have even made it into the national championship game, and we may be sitting here right now with the Georgia Bulldogs as the 2017 national champions. To be honest with you, even if it wasn't the last game on this list chronologically, I may have still put this game number 1 the more that I thought about it. But now it's your turn. What did I miss? Are there any games that should be on the top 10? Are there any of these games that there's no reason they should be on here? They didn't really impact anything. Let me know that down below, as well as your number 1 game that impacted the season. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can also click the circle right here in order to subscribe, or watch any of the other videos over there to the right that YouTube has adjusted for you. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time. Latest opening game in college football history. Alabama made sure to capitalize on one of the worst special teams performances I've ever seen on a big stage, especially by a team like Florida State, which is not really known for having blunders on the special teams side of the ball. Alabama had a fumble recovery on a muffed punt return. They blocked a field goal attempt, and their starting running back, Damian Harris, blocked a punt that resulted in it again in Week 9. The loss in Week 9 means more, right? So instead of counting down 10-1 as 10 being the 10th best thing and 1 being the first best thing, I decided to do it chronologically. So 10 is going to start the beginning of the season, and 1 is going to go all the way to the regular season, or the end of the regular season, rather. No bowl games are on this list because I kind of think of those as the outcome of the Hey Lifers, Dustin here, and in this video I want to take a look at the 10 games that I feel like impacted the 2017 season the most. Now, Up front, I want to be honest with you, this is not the 10 best games of 2017. This is not my 10 favorite games or the 10 most memorable games. These are the 10 games that I think most impacted the outcome of the season as far as championships, as far as dashing playoff hopes, as far as upsetting fan bases. And obviously there are literally dozens, maybe even hundreds of different games that you could probably pick and put on this list depending on your criteria and what you were kind of looking for. But these are the 10 that I chose. And considering the fact that all these kind of build on each other in a certain sense, and the fact that if you lost a game in week 3, but then you lost regular season, right? So obviously the national championship game impacted the season a lot. We found out who it was. The playoffs counted a lot. Even conference championship games obviously counted a lot, but I did not include them on this list. I just focused on the regular season. So with that, let's get started with the 10th entry on this list, which is number 1, Alabama 24, number 3, Florida State 7. Billed all offseason as arguably the greatest